Bryony Dixon.
Hi.
How you doing?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Good.
Great. Happy to be here.
Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself?
I'm a single mom of two boys. I am from England originally, but I've lived in Canada since 2014-ish. I did go back to England to do a master's briefly, then came and moved to Nanaimo in 2015 and been here ever since. I've got a background in arts and culture. Also worked at the university here for a little while. And now I'm working for a US think tank called Civilization Works. Um, yeah, so it's lots of different um, paths, but all kind of tied to culture, and that's my interest, I suppose, like observing and being involved in culture.
Yeah, that's Michael Schellenberger's company, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And how did you get involved in that?
I it all started with, I guess, being cancelled. I used to present at the Nanaimo Fringe Festival, so a theatre festival, which I did when I was a stay-at-home mum as my kind of side gig, passion project for free expression. Really, that's what I care about. So I used to, it's just a small honorarium. You do one festival a year. It was not a big job, but I started that January 2020, and obviously wasn't a great time to take over running a theatre company at the beginning of the pandemic. But, when I started doing that and then kind of watched how COVID rolled out, I noticed a lot of self-censorship going on, things like that. So my role at the Fringe was always trying to encourage artists to question things. I'd go to freedom events and stuff like that to try and see if there was anyone interested in having a platform, because I was one of the people that would be happy to do that and give them one. So I was kind of under the radar with that, I guess, for a while, and then I just shared an article on my personal Facebook page, a Guardian article about a double convicted rapist housed in a women's prison in Scotland, because I'm obviously from the UK. So I share news from where I'm from, and they came for me. The arts community is totally intolerant of any questioning of the trans issue, even if it means that women in prison are being housed with rapists. So you can't question it. You can't share a left-wing article on your personal page. That means you're not allowed to have a position of authority to run a festival or anything like that. So they, orchestrated a cancellation campaign, letter writing to the Canadian Association of Fringe Festivals, which the Nanaimo Fringe is underneath that umbrella. So, there's a higher bureaucracy that you're beholden to their policies and things. So, I got cancelled, and I didn't want to apologize because I didn't think there was a need to. When I was doing the Fringe, I platformed trans artists regularly. It was never an issue. I didn't treat anyone differently. I'm totally fine to, the year before I was cancelled, put on a show called Gender Sucks. Just because I don't agree with the message doesn't mean I wouldn't platform it. So that was kind of always my principle, and so I stood in it, and I basically reached out to Megan Murphy, who is a Canadian feminist. Or I don't think she actually would call herself a feminist anymore, but used to be. And I told her what happened, because she lives in Mexico now, but she's from Vancouver, and so she'd know what Nanaimo was. And so she responded to me. We started doing some talks here on the island about women's rights when she comes back. And through her, I got an article in Quillette. I wrote an article about being, the ideological capture of Fringe. And then with that, Mia Hughes, who's the author of the WPATH files, reached out to me on Twitter and, to say she was sorry to hear what happened, that she was working on a report for Michael Schellenberger's nonprofit. So that piqued my interest. I didn't even know. I followed Michael Schellenberger because of free speech and because of the Twitter files, and I'd seen his work with that. But I didn't realize he worked on the gender issue as well. So that was just a happy coincidence. And then I went onto his website. The website at the time, the organization was called Environmental Progress. And I went to read Mia's report a couple of months later when it was released, and I saw they were advertising for a job. And Megan, I said to Megan, thinking of going for this Schellenberger job. I was working at VIU at the time, at the university here. And she said, "Oh, I know Michael," so she was my reference. And being cancelled in this circle shows that you have principles and integrity. And I think we're finding each other, the people that have certain aligned values on what freedom means, and liberal, classic liberalism. And so that's how I ended up with the job.
Oh, that's very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mia Hughes, Michael Schellenberger, all awesome. VIU, that's where I was going. And I ended up basically canceled for having views, there's only two genders, LGBTQIA2S+ is ridiculous acronym, to be in a scientific paper.
Right.
And so I was doing this research project, and basically I just started having these disputes with my group mates. And it was community-based research. We were doing actual research in the community. And so these conflicts started arising, and eventually I was just told I'm out of the group. Right. And I was fairly calm, but I was fairly, and when the group overruled me, I let that go, but I still, I voiced my opinions.
Yeah, good for you. I was working in the international department at VIU. So, I kind of didn't mind. I've been very disillusioned by higher education, hugely. But I thought that my job there, I did get satisfaction out of it because I was sending students on exchange. So I was thinking, this is the real education. Get out, go to another country, meet real people, get out of your Canadian bubble where you all have this groupthink going on, and see some other perspectives, and come back. And I felt like that was the real education that I was able to provide. So I enjoyed that. And, working in the international department around immigrants like myself, that most of them don't share necessarily every progressive hard left view that Canadians do. And those very progressive Canadians are very fixated on, the marginalized communities, diversity, inclusion, and all this kind of stuff. And then you realize, they're not actually listening to the viewpoints of these people that they claim to advocate for, because then they'd realize that they don't share. Most of the immigrants from developing world do believe that there are just two sexes, and they like masculinity, for instance. They, all of these things that I would just hear about in my conversations with them, and then you kind of realize that there's a real silo effect going on, and the people that are claiming to advocate for these voiceless or less heard voices, shut up and basically listen to these people. They're not listening, clearly. Or it's only the viewpoints that align with theirs that they will listen to. Because it doesn't matter if you're an immigrant or you're a friend of mine, a Syrian settled refugee here, a doctor back in Syria, very intelligent guy, immaculate English, came here in the pandemic. He now works for the Multicultural Society. He's gone to an anti-racism training and has kind of still of the opinion that being racist means that you treat people of different races differently, as opposed to what it's become now with the critical race theory. And so he would voice those kinds of things in the training, and then he got kicked out and told that he was too white presenting. So
white presenting.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And he's literally a Arab who's escaped a civil war. He couldn't possibly know what oppression is because, maybe he could pass for an Italian. It's just crazy.
It is crazy.
I mean, I think more and more people are noticing that it's kind of an indoctrination effort, the higher education stuff. It's interesting because since I've left, things have escalated with campus protests and things. And right before I did leave, I sent an email to the president of VIU because I could see that she was being targeted for, open letter campaigns attempting to cancel her for taking a neutral position on the Israel-Palestine conflict. And I praised her for the neutral position, because institutions should be neutral, especially higher education, where you if you're advocating for people to be able to explore ideas and different viewpoints, then yeah, you need to stay neutral and allow the pro-Palestinian voices to speak, and also the people that are Israeli or support Israel to speak also. And I sent her, resources like, here's a institutional neutrality policy, and Heterodox Academy is a wonderful organization that I was actually, when I was there, trying to start a campus network. And I did meet some professors at VIU that are starting to notice what's going on, and we had a few, meetings and things like that. So I was just getting that going, and then I left. But just to hear from a liberal studies professor that, oh yeah, he's starting to teach Orwell again, great. Like that kind of stuff was good. And every opportunity I had to bring these things up, I went to the day, I can't remember what it's called, but the day where it commemorates the massacre of the women in Quebec, in that college in Quebec. I went to the women's gathering about that, and couldn't help but notice that we weren't just talking about women, right? Like, we were talking about gender expression, and I kind of like, well, no, that was specifically targeting females, right? Like, can we have one day where we discuss that? And the self-censorship of academics, fearing for this kind of mob attack. You look around, you realize it's not academic freedom. There's this overwhelming bureaucracy that's kind of keeping that under check, which I was within. Like, I was within the bureaucracy. So I could totally see how it was working, and I was trying to shift the culture within that space, because that's really stifling the academics, who should value intellectual freedom to pursue whatever they'd like to research.
I feel like there were two teachers of that class that were woke, and one that was not, but just couldn't do anything. And she piled on me as well, when really I was being unfairly treated.
Yeah. No, everything's been inverted, right? In the current world that we live in, and I think that's why we've got huge political realignments happening. It's a very interesting time, and I appreciate people like you doing a podcast where we can talk about it, and it's gonna it contribute to the information landscape and get these other ideas out there that are usually suppressed.
The culture is swinging conservative.
Yeah. I mean, it's the progressivism is just so far left. And I was totally educated in that, right? Like, I studied drama at university, so used to defend Trudeau being a drama teacher and all that kind of stuff. Totally sold all of the postmodernist theories, and that was my education. But I think in England I'd had K through 12 of just not hating myself, not hating my culture, not getting to be grounded in something that is just in terms of identity, if we're going to speak in that sense. It was wholesome, and I could feel like I wasn't ashamed. I feel like the much of the education now is based on shame, which is never healthy or good for anyone. But I started to then get these ideas at university, and I started to think, now I'm not as happy as I used to be. I think there's a lot of research out there about liberals being not as happy as conservatives, and I can see why, because you tiptoe on eggshells everywhere you go. The social dynamic of just having a laugh and having a joke is gone, which is why I am hopeful. I don't necessarily know if it's going conservative. It's just because the Overton window's gone so far left that we're coming back, hopefully, to a centre.
Anything right of here.
Yeah.
Like, that's what Elon Musk is saying. He's saying Twitter is not right now. It's just right of where it was when they were banning every conservative voice on there.
Yeah, totally. Because I mean, I just know many, as I say, classical liberalism now is deemed to be right, far right, right? Like, so that's my philosophical background, I guess, post-Enlightenment values. But then I'm doing another talk with Megan on September 14th, and I'm looking at progressivism and the progressive era and the turn of the 20th century in America, And, you know, they were thinking the same things back then, you know, anti-individual. They didn't like the individualism. They didn't like classical liberalism, you know, thinking that they could
Were they Marxist back then?
do well, obviously that was being prominent in Europe and things, those ideas. But I think there was this idea of you know, getting rid of the waste of capitalism by having an expert class and an administrative state that would just basically run things, which is, when I'm looking at that for my talk, I'm like, well, that seems pretty much what they're doing now, right? And, you know, where my talk is going is maybe a little bit of conjecture, but I'm saying, you know, that's the same time eugenics was a big thing. And I've been told, when I defended certain medical choices that people had, that was a form of eugenics. The comorbidities that exist underneath that are then misdiagnosed as gender dysphoria, as opposed to so it's very much, to me, that's why I'm trying to raise the alarm, and I don't really care about people calling me a bigot, because as far as I'm concerned, you know, we need to stop castrating kids.
Yeah.
And also, you know, the other things that are implicating women's rights and gay rights. You know, people don't seem to understand that if you deny that sex is a legal concept, and you place gender above it, then there's no same protections for same-sex attraction, which is what gay people fought for. And we have a situation now where they'll, you know, these advocates for trans rights will suggest that lesbians should accept men in dresses, you know, fully male-bodied partners, and if they refuse or don't want to, then that somehow makes them bigoted.
They can get banned from their dating apps and things.
Yeah, banned from Pride. Lots of lesbians banned from Pride. I mean, it's good that we've got the Cass review that came out this year to really validate that position. I mean, I felt it already before that, but like knowing that we had the most comprehensive literature review to date across, you know, lots of countries. It's not just refined to England. And, you know, it categorically says that there's no evidence of benefit for puberty blockers. You know, this is ideologically driven experimentation on children. And then, of course, that's what the WPATH files revealed, was that internally the professionals that work at WPATH or affiliated with WPATH know that kids can't consent. Because I think the wider culture has been told these things are reversible. They're not reversible. You can't... you know, we'll just pause puberty. No, that's going to have irreversible impacts on child development.
So I've heard that at least one of these treatments is pretty much guaranteed to sterilize. And is that the puberty blockers or the hormones?
It's the combination of both. So, yeah. It's so when you do the puberty blockers and then you move on, which it's over 90% of the kids that start the puberty blockers do go on to the hormones. So it's true. Pretty much, yeah, you're going to...
It's virtually all.
And then there's a very disturbing Zoom video call that's leaked of Dr. Marcy Bowers, who's the surgeon for like Jazz Jennings.
Done thousands of surgeries.
Yeah, and this person was the president of WPATH, and they say on this video, there are 0 boys who were given puberty blockers at Tanner stage 2, which is like prepubescent 9 to 11, 0 are able to achieve orgasm later in life. So this is what I try to get through to the kind of LGBTQ crowd, because I'm like, they might not care about not having kids. I think that's been well conditioned into them, but they're going to care about not being able to have an orgasm.
Oh yeah.
Not being able to experience pleasure. That's what the whole thing is about.
Right.
So just really trying to hammer that home. What are you denying these kids? They don't even know. At 9 years old, they don't even know what that is. And you're saying that they should be put on this medical pathway.
That's the most profound child abuse. That is assault. Like, what do you call it, right?
Yeah.
You're irreversibly harming these kids.
Yeah. And it's, of course, the other leftist side of me is like, this is a huge, profitable pipeline. I read the amazing, phrase classroom to clinic pipeline for a lifetime pharmaceutical subscription model right through. And, there's my last talk I did with Megan, I clipped it. This doctor at Vanderbilt University saying, phalloplasty, that's $100,000 for the hospital. So no wonder they want the children to jump on that train, that gravy train.
Growth industry.
Yeah.
Multi-billion-dollar.
Yeah. Oh yeah. The projections for the sex reassignment surgery market are just, skyrocketing. And so they must censor any dissent. They must propagandize us to accept this kind of transhumanist move. The synthetic biology stuff that's been kind of going on in the background, that I don't think most people realize that that's the direction it's going in. They want to normalize, and in law as well, get the legal framework in place that we can have basically transhumanist things for people that would rather
genetic altering and all that.
I mean, Martine Rothblatt and this. So I'm clipping them for my talk on Saturday, and they did a keynote speech down at UVic. So this is Canada's at the forefront of this. There's Jennifer Pritzker is one of the heirs to the Hyatt Hotel fortune, billionaire autogynephile, used to be in the army, now a trans woman. Gave UVic $2 million for their chair in transgender studies. And in 2016, they had a keynote address by Martine Rothblatt, who is also a transhumanist, lawyer and CEO of all these kinds of pharmaceutical kind of companies, or that are going with the transhumanist angle. And now, Forbes 45th, listed 45th in Forbes's self-made women list. And he is describing in this keynote address about, the kind of end game of transhumanism, which would be, downloading your mind to the cloud. He concedes that it's radical to abandon your body altogether, but then basically using nano drone technology to assume any phenotype, so any form that you wanted. So are we really surprised that we're allowing kids to pretend that they are cats at school? It's not just about gender, right? It's about your entire physiology, your entire body, and being able to change that eventually. And I have a sneaking suspicion that the poor kids aren't going to be able to do that. It's only going to be available to the rich people to be able to do this. So at the minute, the poor kids and the kids we're all pushing this on are just the experiments. And so eventually, when they've honed it and they know what works, the people with money will be able to probably safely participate in it themselves. I see it all as a human experimentation.
Isn't it going to backfire?
Oh, it already is, isn't it? We're seeing all the, lots of detransitioners coming forward. I mean, when we do these talks, even locally, I've had the Q&A is the best bit. When we did one up in Parksville, and we had an older gentleman who believed he was a trans woman for 20, I think it was 20 years or something, going through as an adult, not as a child, going through all the steps, and it's taken them this long to realize, no matter what I do, I'm not going to become a woman. I can do all the surgeries I want, I can take all the hormones I want, but it's not going to literally change my sex. And it's taken them that long to realize. And then he was saying, so then this is what we're telling children. That's wrong. And then we did another talk in Duncan this year, and we had a young girl come, and she's actually going to be speaking on Saturday. And she, put up her hand and said a couple of years ago, I think, has it been 5 years? Maybe 5 years since she had her breasts removed. She's only 29, but so she did it as an adult as well. It just shows you how disturbing it is that children might get caught up in this if adults are getting caught up in this. But she, believed herself to be non-binary. So she never wanted to do the hormones. She said she got people trying to push them on her, but she didn't want that. She just wanted to get her breasts off, and no therapy, no counselling. Yeah, okay, we'll sign you right up, and they did it. And to me, that is a clear case of self-harm that they didn't investigate at all. And of course, now she's realizing that she's not non-binary. She's got all these amazing pictures that she showed me of these, her whole non-binary people have always exist, shaved head, and now she's like, embracing her womanhood more. But it just goes to show that yes, it can go wrong. It's not even just for children, but if it's happening to adults and they're realizing that they made a mistake, why are we allowing kids to make these irreversible decisions? It's not. So we need some adults in the room to protect those kids.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why it's an anti-gay movement, the transgender movement, is because most of these kids would grow up to be gay.
Yes. Totally. The Tavistock Clinic in England got shut down. So the Cass report, Hilary Cass was the chair of the Royal College for Paediatrics, a very credentialed lady that they hired to do this independent review. It took 4 years. 2 years in, she released an interim report that said you've got to shut down that clinic. Like it was the main paediatric gender clinic in England. They shut it down. And there was like whistleblowers inside that clinic saying there'll be no gay kids left. Like they knew, lots of people know that that's happening. And some of the whistleblowers that have come forward since at other clinics, like in the States, I think that lady called Jamie Reed, people like that, they are gay themselves. Jamie Reed, I think, is a lesbian married to a trans man, I think. So a woman, biologically woman. So obviously not a transphobe, right? But noticing we're doing this to gay kids. And yes, so that it is totally homophobic.
And then there's the whole, if there's a female to male trans on a gay app.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, totally. A gay...
Or lesbians, like a man saying he's a lesbian on a lesbian app.
Oh, totally.
And that's, if you have a problem with that, then you're a bigot, you're a transphobe.
Totally.
But really, a lesbian is someone who wants to have sex with women.
Mm-hmm. Same sex, yeah. Exactly.
Same sex and same women. Yeah.
Exactly. And I'd always been familiar with that lesbian angle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that, because that's rape culture, right? If you go on a date with someone, they don't tell you till you get back that they're actually a man, and then they could overpower you, right? Like that's dangerous. So I was aware of that. But one of our talks, a gay man came and actually said, now we've got a situation and it's horrible where we're convincing young girls that if they have a double mastectomy and attach a fake appendage to their crotch, that they're men. And then, so they do this to themselves and they're straight. And then they want to go on a gay app with men because they're actually straight women. And those gay men don't want to have sex with them. And so we've got this heartbreaking moment where these girls have mutilated themselves, and then the gay men are also in a horrible position where they're being shamed if they don't want to accept that as a sexual partner. It's not good for gay people, not at all. No.
And women's spaces being invaded by sexual predators in some cases.
I just don't understand why. I think we're at this utopian moment where people just forget that there's bad actors out there. So if you're in prison, let's assume you're a criminal. And if you can say one thing and you'll move from that men's prison into that lower security prison over there where you've got, it's an easier time, you're around women and maybe you are a predator. Like, even if you weren't, like, who wouldn't do that? Who wouldn't say I'm a woman just to go over to have an easier life in prison? Like, even if it was that level. But of course, actually, there has been reports on prisons in Canada. And I think they did a review of 99 gender diverse inmates. 46% or 45%, around that number, are incarcerated for a sexual offence, or they have a history of sexual offending. And they're allowed to be in the women's prison. And then the last talk we did in Victoria, so I was obviously very sympathetic to the prisoners. We know that people in prison are disproportionately Indigenous. People in women's prisons are mostly victims of male violence and sexual assault, and then they're being trapped in a prison with men. But we also had a prison guard come and speak at the last Q&A in Victoria that we did. And she said, I'm not allowed to know if I'm about to go in that cell and it's a man in there. is a male, right? Like, and that's dangerous for her. And I was thinking, where is her union? Where is her protection as an employee? That sounds like an issue with labor law right there, right? Like, so many ways in which this is being disregarded for the ideology, which comes above all else, right?
So I've had these situations where I have a conversation with someone. So when I told her that if you have XY chromosomes, you shouldn't be in combat sports against people with XX chromosomes because males are 40 to 50% stronger in upper body strength than females on average. And this one biological fact set this person off to the point where she ended up screaming at me.
That's a dodgy sign right there. If you can't have a conversation with people, yeah, it's and on the chromosome thing, just having to. I never thought I'd have to like go back and really relearn some biology, but it is that case, right? Like, and there's a very, very simple one that I've had to repeat a lot since the Olympics about, because I've even had people say there's no definites or definitives in biology or something like that. And I was like, is there a third gamete type? There's two gametes, large and small, ova and sperm. And yes, in terms of disorders of sexual development, you might have, I think there's like one example, what's it called? Swires syndrome, where you have XY, but you don't have the part of the gene that would produce testosterone. So you really don't have the male advantage so much, but it's very, very small amount. And so the Olympic boxer issue was not the case because
No.
they were virilized. They looked like they'd gone through male puberty. So that was not the case of Swires.
Right.
And I think Swires people are, because of that, physically not very strong. So they wouldn't be athletes. But it's a case of the chromosomes determine the pathway that you go down to determine which type of gamete that you will produce. So there's a lot of different pathways to get there, but there's only two gametes. So that's why there still are only two sexes. You either produce or have the function to produce, because of course people are sterile or whatever, but you would have the functional pathway to produce either a sperm or ova. And that's where the binary is. And it does mean that, yes, sex is binary.
Sex differences are well established in both biology and psychology.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've had side conversations with my daycare provider. She told me and this was before I got cancelled. She told me, my teenage daughter thinks I'm a dinosaur because I see that kids at preschool, the boys like these toys and the girls like those toys. Right? Like there's something, it's not always the case. And that's the other thing we should say about this ideology is that it's regressive. Just because you want to play with dolls or whatever doesn't mean you're a woman. Like it's like it goes on the stereotypes. So everything now revolves around being a woman is every stereotype of femininity, right? And being a man is every masculine stereotype. I thought when I was a left, which I still consider myself to be liberal, that I thought that's what we were fighting to overcome was the stereotypes, right? And then it's just, again, everything's inverted on its head. Now it's all about the stereotypes. Well, I think that was a crucial moment where they switched the word sex for gender. So because as far as a drama degree, the way I was told it was that gender was different to sex, right? And now they've made it the same thing. So that's the slippery slope, right? I could get on board with, okay, we have sex, that's immutable, you cannot change it. And then we have gender, which is more of your personality and it's more whether you like, what kind of things you like to do in your time. And is the performance, as Judith Butler would say, the repetitive actions that you perform. Whatever.
So personality.
Yeah, essentially. Right. So I'm like, okay, if that's the distinction, fine. But then the language started to become gender was used instead of sex. And then that's where all things fall apart. I mean, the first event I did with Megan in Saltaire, we had protesters outside and we actually managed to, we wanted them to come in for the whole talk. A couple came in for the Q&A at the end, so they actually missed the entire talk. But they came in to ask questions, and we had that moment. Megan asked, "What is what is gender or something like that. And even that activist knew that it was different to sex, right? Like, and so as soon as you can establish definitions like that and get on the same page, I think then you can get somewhere. But usually it means that you're unraveling their very tightly held beliefs. And that's when there's a angry response. It's not just this issue. I've had it with the MAID, with euthanasia. I've tried to bring that up to a couple of people here because it's another, if I'm talking about depopulation agendas, eugenics programs, MAID is another one of those. I'm not anti-euthanasia at all. I think for terminal illness it would be okay. But I'm disturbed by the numbers in Canada for sure. And I have, when I was at VIU, attended a Global Perspectives panel talk on MAID, which had the nursing professor and, someone from New Zealand, someone from Switzerland, and someone from Spain or Portugal, I can't remember, places where it's also legal. And the whole framing of the talk was about ethics and social justice concerns. And I've actually, as a child at school, participated in a debate on euthanasia, and I was on the pro-euthanasia side. So I knew the arguments and I knew the counter-arguments to the ethical concerns with it. And I noticed that they didn't bring up any of the ethical concerns like slippery slopes, or if you've got relatives that just want to off you, or, you got a crazy doctor that gets carried away. Like, none of that came up at all. The new ethics of this is about social justice, which means, and this is their words, and it's the same language throughout everything else that's going on in this kind of bureaucratic world right now. How do we reduce barriers to accessing MAID for Indigenous people and for disabled people? And I'm sitting there thinking, you're just talking about how do you kill more disabled people and more Indigenous people. That's what you're talking about. And you're framing it in
people with mental health issues.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because obviously that's where it's heading, expanding to minors. That's why the trans issue is so important, because if we establish that, yes, they can consent to those irreversible surgeries without parental consent, and then they can consent to MAID also. And, they had space for 2 questions at the end. And I had just read a very, very long article on this that laid out the kind of figures at the time, and I think it was based on 2021 was the latest figures they had, and 10,000 people euthanized in Canada that year, and they used California as a comparison. Similar population size, similarly progressive as Canadians are. 500 people euthanized in California in the same year. So I'm like, there's something up there. You've got a huge disparity with numbers, and you're talking about reducing barriers. You're talking about making it easier to be euthanized, which is a subject where you should have safeguards in place. And they had this creepy kind of glazed expression about the whole thing, talking about, it's because if you talk very nicely about it, then people don't seem to question what you're saying. And you've got this nice language that kind of just we're being caring. This is a nice thing to do, right? And so I asked them, I brought up the fact that we've got veterans asking for a chairlift and offered MAID instead. This is the other thing when the humans are out of the picture and we've got AI distributing these letters or whatever. They're not going to care. There's not going to be any human on the end of it. You're just going to get that. Oh yeah, it's this kind of systematic efficiency. Again, seems very, very. Paralleled with other eugenics or euthanasia programs elsewhere. And
eugenics, it almost just seems anti-human at this point.
Yeah, and it totally is.
They just want us all to die.
I do think we've been conditioned to believe that. I remember had a friend come over and try and sell me on a pyramid scheme when I used to be a stay-at-home mum, and it was like for vitamins that extend your life or whatever. And I said, I think there's enough people already, isn't there? And we shouldn't be extending life anymore. I said that. I know that everyone else is also conditioned to believe there's too many people on the planet, and that's when you don't care about the atrocities happening because, actually it's good for the planet to have less people, right? Yeah. So we don't care about the sterilization program. We don't care about the euthanasia getting out of hand.
I think this is just the spirit that guided Karl Marx
Yeah.
It's anti-human. It's aimed at destruction. A line near the end of the Communist Manifesto there is the forcible overthrow of all existing conditions. It's just, his favorite line in literature was, all that exists deserves to perish. Like, this is a death cult.
Oh yeah.
Sorry, I get a little intense.
No, I think I believe that too. And I think it's, it's all the issues that are censored and you can't talk about, right? Climate, gender, vaccines, all the things that are, if you investigate or dug a little bit deeper, you might think, and I am someone, I just want to say, that did get vaccinated. So I changed my mind. That's going to be the angle of my talk. I'm actually veering away from the women's rights because I think it's all part of the same thing. But I think people don't understand the connections, so I think you get a lot of men that like, it's not my issue, right? Or a lot of feminist women that think that the Conservative Party or whoever are awful and they're so bad for women's rights. They haven't noticed this political realignment. They haven't noticed that this issue is tied to a bigger agenda. And so I'm kind of wanting to bring some of that to the foreground, so that they can start understanding, like, why are we being gaslit about this? Why is the Olympic Committee just brazenly insisting that they're not going to test someone who has done 2 sex tests at labs that are accredited by the World Doping Agency or whatever it's called. Like, they try to discredit the Boxing Association, right? But the labs are accredited labs, and those results were the results. So rather than thinking about the women's safety and doing the test, the ideology, again, is all that matters. So female on the passport, we're not going to look into it any further. They were very careful, I noticed, in the press conferences to only say woman and not female. That was, I think, deliberate, because they feel like culturally we've changed the meaning of the word woman. And it would be a lie that they might be more liable for if they admitted female, right? So if anyone's interested, they should go back and watch how carefully they tread around that. But and again, what's the Olympics is now kind of just this
woke event,
and it's hugely influenced by the corporations, right? Like, again, it's tied to this kind of, so you're talking about Marxism, and I think that's on the kind of cultural, socio-cultural level, but above that, it seems to me to be a fascist situation when we've got corporations and states merging together, so that there's really no democracy, right? Like, that's what the private partnerships are all about.
I wonder if how many of these elite, corporate owners, if they're how possessed they are by this ideology, or if they're using it as a tool in order to, institute that fascism.
Yeah. I think so. It's the divide and conquer is very helpful, right? With all these
There's a lot of
issues.
people that really are Marxists, though, that really believe,
I know, and they don't see what they're doing. They
utopianism, though.
They do, and I totally, and yet they don't realize that they're supporting all the corporate initiatives, right? So blind to that, and it's insane, really. Like, and they're anti-fascist, but if you, who are the ones that are trying to shut down dissent with intimidation and whatever? Like, they don't really know. I'm compelled by, like, the working class. Like, that's why I consider myself to be left still, because I care about working class people. But the Marxists you're describing hate working class people. Like, really, they're kind of laptop class people, aren't they?
Champagne socialists.
Yeah.
Limousine liberals, whatever.
Yeah. No, exactly. Yeah. And I think it's easier to see that here because in Canada, working class people can earn pretty good money. In England, that the industry is gone, so they really don't have the same backing. Like, here, your working class communities, they're often like got loads of equipment, like they're autonomous. They've got sovereignty, whereas in England that's not really the case. So I don't know where I was going with that, but I just notice, I think that's part of the resentment here towards the working class, because they're not even poor either, right? Like they're making money off oil, or they're doing, destroying the planet, whatever. So there's that resentment built in as well. But it certainly can't be Marxist if you don't like the working class.
Seems to be a disdain for the poor amongst these elites, right? The way that, say, in Germany, they made the energy prices high, which hurts poor people, right?
Course, yeah.
Or the way they value the planet over people.
Yeah.
It's
Rob Henderson says it's luxury beliefs. Yeah.
I've seen.
Yeah. He's a good book.
Yeah, I don't know where to go from there.
We're going deep.
Yeah.
Yeah. What else was I? Well, the energy thing is interesting too. I mean, that's obviously another topic that Michael's written about with Apocalypse Never, why environmental alarmism hurts us all. And that's my real concern, I think. I think we had enough people, although it may not have seemed that way, I think we had enough people or alliances to be made on the health freedom front, or the same hippies that don't want GMOs, they don't want to, vaccinate their kids or whatever in general, aligned with the kind of sovereign redneck kind of people, and that helped build enough of a majority, I think, that we can resist that. But when it comes to climate, because it's this managerial class that's really the one pushing everything. So we had those kind of fringy viewpoints on the health freedom that could come together to counter the very well trained bureaucracy, and then but with climate, I think all the hippies will join the bureaucrats on that one. And I obviously I care about having a healthy, beautiful planet that's looked after, but the sleight of hand that's changed, caring about pollution and actual, corporate greed in that aspect, and that train derailment that happened last year, that just no one spoke about. Everything's become about carbon. Why is that, when carbon is plant food? And the planet is greener now than it used to be, because of a slight increase in carbon dioxide. It's because it's tied to something you can track and control people through, like food, like travel, like family size. It's putting the onus on the poor and that level, and totally taking it off of the corporations that are doing all the major polluting and resource extraction and all those types of horrendous things that they're doing, right? So again, I think that my issue with the climate hysteria comes from a humanist, used to be left viewpoint of people versus the corporations, right? And again, that's been usurped, and again, extensive propaganda and censorship around the issue, because there's, and COVID was what highlighted to me that there was dissent on a lot of these issues. I was just asleep. Wasn't paying attention, just trying to raise my family, move to a new country. And so when I saw the truckers, and I was following that just because I thought, this is cool. I'm not Canadian. So I was like, wow, this is the first moment I've seen Canadians feel like some sort of national sense of unity. It felt like that for me. And I was watching it on live streams as opposed to, in the media, and it didn't get picked up for a while because it started here where we are and went across the country. So I had a couple of days to see the unsmeared version of events with live videos and stuff like that, seeing all the people on overpasses. And here's a sense of the NDP type voter telling me that they care about the poor, but they actually don't. If they care about freedom, why don't they write to their MP? I'm living, or their MLA or whatever. I'm living with the Syrian guy I mentioned, and he doesn't know what that is. I'm an immigrant, so I kind of get, you come to a new country, you don't know what the political system is. Maybe they don't speak English. You got a lot of immigrants here that don't speak great English. Maybe they can't write a letter. Maybe the way that they can express their political dissent is by standing on an overpass in minus 40 degrees waving a flag. That's the way that they can do that. And you want to disenfranchise them. You want to take their voice away.
Not to mention, so many people think that they're all misogynists and they're all racists because our prime minister said that they're all misogynists and racists, and they're anti-science, and they're a danger to the rest of us. And what are we going to do with these people? Do we tolerate them? Like, just
that
the
language is
craziest
dangerous
stuff. And so many people believed that, thought that these were, the far right, flag waving Canadians, right?
Oh, totally. And I lost friends over that. Right after that, Trudeau said that. I was at their house for dinner, and I evoked. I know everyone's like Nazis are everywhere, but like I just said, it doesn't start with let's throw them all in the death camp. Like, it's very gradual, and as soon as I hear a politician demonizing a whole group of people with that kind of rhetoric,
half the country,
I was very disturbed, and I brought it up, and about that he had just said that they're all racist, misogynists, and do we tolerate that exact thing? And they kind of didn't. We also got into the trans issue, and the girl was a J.K. Rowling fan, and so I'm kind of trying to defend J.K. Rowling, and so we didn't hang out again since then. But like, I just. I do think there needs to be more education around the ways in which, I don't know, because people are also it's so interesting when you've got a toe in both camps, because you can see this side calling that side a fascist, and, they think the same of each other, which is so frustrating to me, because I'm kind of like, if you just sat down, you might... but they're living in completely different information environments. I heard Brett Weinstein talk about Plato's Cave the other day, and how it's, instead of one projection that we might be seeing on the cave wall, we're seeing two different projections. And that seems totally true to me. Like, so even if you do sit at the table, you've got completely different information, you've got completely different definitions of what you're talking about. So like, trying to connect or find the common ground seems very difficult.
Yeah, but one side basically undermines science, and the other one is, very based in scientific facts.
Yeah. And then there's just so much information out there that it's you can always pull a study out of your ass that says, anything you want to prove, pretty much, right? I think COVID proved that. But that's why the censorship really piqued me, because I was like, they're suppressing true information from experts when they say we have to trust the science and we trust the experts and everything else. That was exposed to me in the trucker convoy when they invited the health officials to come and sit with the few doctors that showed up, and then I watched them use real Ontario government data and refresh the take you through the data that they were talking about. And then I thought, and my stepdad was also a PR executive, so I do understand the strategy of just ignoring, and then it'll go away, and we've got this crazy news cycle that means we'll forget about it in 12 hours, and so that they're relying on that, right? But that revealed to me that there is a lot of expert dissent. And then I realized that's also the case on climate. When the Nobel Prize winner of 2022 started saying that there's no climate emergency, signed on to that declaration. It's got like 16,000 signatures from various scientists that say it's not an emergency. And he's now doesn't get speaking gigs, right? So as soon as you start doing that, then how does that impact the culture when you don't have the opportunity to have a platform? If you lose your funding, you're not. These are all incentive structures to make sure you're only going to be saying the establishment narrative. And in arts and culture, that's very much the way. When I would write grants to run the Fringe, I've got to write the anti-racism grant. I've got to write. The Fringe was slightly protected because the way it works is it's supposed to value free expression. And it's supposed to be open access with no cultural gatekeepers. That is the whole point. That's why I wanted to do it. So people apply by lottery draw, and I pull the names out of a hat. That's why if Gender Sucks comes out, sure, I'm presenting that this year. That's what the principle is. The producer has no say in the artistic content of what's on at the festival, which I think is helpful for all those producers that are terrified that they're going to get attacked for platforming someone that says something slightly insensitive. Actually, that's the whole way Fringe works. It's, you can take it off of your shoulders and say that it's a lottery draw. The artist should maybe, there's a lot, as a psychology person, you might be aware, but the trigger warning thing is not helpful. It doesn't actually do what they say it does. It doesn't help you avoid your trauma. It actually, it helps you avoid your trauma, so you're not going to then address it. It's actually bad for you to have these trigger warnings, right? But if we need to put content warnings up, then that's what you do as a producer, and then it's on the audience to decide whether they want to go in and watch it or not. Why are we, again, infantilizing the audience? Why can't they make their own adult choice if they want to go and see that or not? And they take that risk. If you get offended when you go in and you knew what the content was going to be, then that's on you. And as a producer, you can kind of say that you don't have to carry the weight of that responsibility. But I went to a conference in Montreal in 2022 and tried to bring these things up to all the other Fringe producers that were there. And, because I can use the leftist language, I could get through those conversations okay. But every night I was coming home crying because it's the emotional, like, you're just delicately treading the line, making sure you're not, but you want to get your point across. Like, I'm not going to not say these things. It was right around the time that Kyrie had just been cancelled for sharing a link to a documentary on Amazon, which Amazon wasn't punished for, right? But the black guy that doesn't know about his heritage in Africa might share a documentary that, was a little controversial. I think there was something about Holocaust denial in it or whatever. But again, you share a link. You're not necessarily saying you agree with everything in the documentary, right? Maybe there's one interesting point that you think people should see. But the point was, who's more oppressed now? Like, we've got this moment of, is the black guy not allowed to look into that? Is he not allowed to talk about that? So I was trying to have these conversations with other producers, and I think they kind of missed the point. But the overwhelming impression I got from that whole conference was there used to be a principle of Fringe that the artistic freedom of the artist was unrestrained. And that was like one of the 5 principles. And the whole discussion was, in the wake of post-George Floyd, that's outdated now and we should remove that principle. So no artistic freedom anymore. And they did. They took it out. And, the Canadian Association of Fringe also has American fringes in it. And some of them were there and they were complaining about their First Amendment, right, as being a bad thing. Oh, you guys are all right. You've got hate speech laws up here. We got the First Amendment. So we can't, it's really hard for us. And I was just like, it's crazy. This is Fringe. But it's these very radical postgraduates. All these organizations have no money. So they're just going to hire that graduate straight out of university who's got all these radical woke ideas, especially in the arts and humanities, right? And then they're implementing them on a broad scale without really thinking. And there was another fringe there that's run by East Indians, as you'd call them. And I was trying to think about that with that producer, like, especially on the trans issue. She brought it up that, trying to get her community on board with some of that was going to be difficult. And I'm like, well, that's what Fringe is, right? You should be able to have the show that the queer performance art and the family-friendly puppet show and the, Ibsen play. You should be able to have the musical, everything, and something for everyone. But as soon as you start saying, oh, no, that's not allowed. We can't have that spoken word poet that talks about there are men and there are women. That needs to be cancelled. And then they would just not allow the play at all. So they say that they're not interfering with the artistic content. They just cancel don't let them have a platform whatsoever. That was their workaround, like they weren't interfering with it. And so that shapes the culture. If that's a fringe festival, that's where people are working out their artistic ideas to develop them into something bigger. We're not going to get anything that's not endorsed by the state, pretty much. It's agitprop, as far as I'm concerned.
Where is all this going? What's the goal of all of this authoritarian leftism and all of this these gender and race quotas that they're putting into every organization? What what do they want? Like, what do they want society to look like? Do they have a utopian vision? Communists did, and this is, you know, an evolution of Marxism. So
No, I think so. I mean, this would all be just my guess.
yeah,
Haven't got any concrete evidence. I mean, there is concrete evidence that there's an agenda, and you know, I've got that, and I took it to the Fringe conference with me, the Great Reset book, and I'm like, here you go, guys. Like, this is actually a thing that is top-down driven, and you think that you are a grassroots up. No, you're not. You're pushing that. But in terms of like where the end game is, you know.
so they don't know that they're a part of a Great
No.
Reset plan. That
No.
they're like little cogs in the
Yeah,
machine.
no, they don't know. That's why it is it's an issue of very well-meaning, well-trained people that don't. And I was one of them. Like, I remember being told about the WEF, like the World Economic Forum. I knew about it called Davos. This is another thing about language, right? In England, we call that the Davos meeting. So I didn't know what the WEF was when people were talking about that here. But if someone had said Davos, I would have known. But someone brought that up to me. I brought it up to my boss, and we work in the international department. So we are, and I remember seeing after it was put on my radar, CVs coming in. Oh, you're a young global leader of the World Economic Forum on your CV, right? Like, and we're pushing social development goals, the UN social development goals. People have got the lapel pin, you know, that Bill Gates is wearing. Like, it's they don't know that they're part of that. Because my boss, who's very, you know, she's been in the international education department, like game for 20 years or whatever, she did not know what the World Economic Forum was. She didn't know that that she certainly wouldn't know that half your government has been through their training programs. And lots of people have obviously gone through those. So I believe in terms of what the end game is that they need less people because then it's easier to control, implement. You know, and I used to be someone that would support universal basic income. Then I saw them freezing bank accounts of truckers. You know, England, pretty much all we do is banking. So as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh, this is an imperialism. This is a way of controlling, you know, people through finance. And yeah, so I think there's a, you know, social credit score going to be tied to centralized digital currencies. I went to England a couple of years ago and I was in Bank. So it's where all the Bank of England stuff is. I mean, it's a beautiful bar. And there's a guy next to me. Bank of England's just across the street and he worked there. And so I ask him, as I do, like I bring this stuff up to anyone I meet, tell me about central bank digital currencies. And he said, oh yeah, things are going to be real different in a few years' time. You're right. So just these day-to-day interactions is where I'm getting my viewpoint from. Like just asking real people who are working in these institutions what's going on. And they're all, you know, doing their little job, right? And that's again where you've got this kind of specialization which is siloing people rather than having the grand narrative, because I don't think postmodernists like the grand narrative, right? It's about this siloed my expertise. So you don't notice how that is actually contributing to the overall plan, which is complete global control, led by the corporations and the corrupt governments. And it's kind of like a gangster setup. Like, it really does feel like a kind of mob situation.
This can't be good, right?
No.
Like historically, this has been bad when you get absolute power in the hands of a few people who have, you know, total control over the population. Is there a charitable interpretation of this? Like, could the WEF really have our best interests at heart?
Well, I mean, you read the Great Reset, and it sounds wonderful.
It always does, doesn't it? Communism sounds nice, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. And then I think you just need to make sure you're also reading people like Thomas Sowell. So you know that these good ideas have been tried before, and they didn't actually work, right? And the more government intervention there is, sometimes the worse it gets.
Typically, I think.
Yeah. That's my charitable interpretation. Yeah. So, you know, I'm like one for maybe safety nets, but.
Yeah. You know, maybe they really are just going to provide abundantly for everybody, and we don't really have to work. They can just give us our social credits.
But that's an interesting word, because they don't. It's a scarcity movement, just like it's an anti-human one. It's built on scarcity, not abundance. And I didn't get to finish it, but I was listening to an ex Google employee on the Trigonometry podcast yesterday. It's a recent one. And he was talking about how AI would have, he was very concerned, raising the alarm about smart cities, right? Like all of the smart stuff is actually a sign that you're being controlled. But he did say that AI should have the capacity to give abundance, right? And not be taking. He's, of course they got to the point where this is utopian and that doesn't work out in the real world. But that's it. Like there is a way in which energy usage could be abundant. Michael Schellenberger, my boss, is an advocate for nuclear power, right? But instead, we're being driven towards these they're not energy dense resources like wind and solar that are, destroying the natural environment, killing whales.
Driving up the cost of energy.
Yeah, exactly. They're unreliable, they're intermittent, so energy costs are going up. And then everything obviously is more expensive. So it's a degrowth in the developing world. We're denying. It's a degrowth in the developed world, and then we're denying the developing world the ability to develop because no, you can't have the same fossil fuel usage that we had. You're just going to have to stay impoverished forever. And then even then, you also see oil companies going and doing massive land grabs because, actually now we need to buy back our, they're all through the ESG scores, right? They need to make sure that they're planting enough trees or whatever. So they'll steal land from all these indigenous farmers in Africa and plant some trees, the oil companies, right? And then, but you care about indigenous people. It's... So again, like it sounds really nice. We're planting loads of trees. Scratch beneath the surface, and it's you're empowering all the oil companies that you, and the way the subsidies work and things like that, right? Just very manipulative. It's taken away the ability for a free market, and that means that we're not really innovating for an abundant type of mindset. We're going into this scarcity, and then that's going to make us, I guess, more hostile to one another. I don't think that's good psychologically for people. And then obviously we think there's too many people and blah blah blah. So horrors could come.
Yeah, it's very concerning that it's an elite obsession that the population must be controlled. Yeah, Bill Gates and all of those people historically, Kissinger. Right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, education with Kissinger, right? Like, wasn't he big on that? Or was it Rockefeller? I can't remember. But it's a lot of that. And, we've got a 2009, Bill Gates had a meeting with a load of billionaires about how they could curb population. His foundation used to be called the Institute for Population Control, and then they rebranded. So it's all about branding. It's all about PR.
Yeah, and Planned Parenthood was Margaret Sanger's organization. She's a eugenicist.
Yes. Yeah, and I think when you point that out, like that, they're how and I'm obviously not, and I'm pro-choice, but there are nuances to all these issues, and the Planned Parenthood one, when it's popping up in all the black communities, it's responsible for killing a lot of black children, or could have been black people, right? Like, and culturally, I worry about that, and that's why I like people like Thomas Sowell, and there's a lot of black commentators that are noticing this, like how culturally they're being pushed a kind of glamorized lifestyle that's not good for them as a community. It's going to keep you in this kind of impoverished dependency on the state, as opposed to and fighting, and rather than trying to grow out of it. People like Roland Fryer as well, wonderful economist. So just that's what I mean. And yeah, he was cancelled from Harvard, right, for doing research into police brutality. And his research revealed he was like a star of Harvard. Young black guy, come from very poor background. And of course, when you have had that class perspective, your research is quite different, I think, to the people that were silver spooned their whole lives. The people like Claudine Gay, for instance, who was the president of Harvard, right, that just had to resign. But Claudine Gay tried to orchestrate the cancellation of Roland Fryer because he did this research that showed that, while there is more physical violence, police violence towards black people, in terms of death, like causing death, there's actually no bias there. If it's a fatal police interaction, there's no racial bias, which was not what he was expecting to find.
Yeah,
but of course he had integrity, so still published the findings and was advised not to publish those findings, right? But as soon as he did, he got taken down by the Me Too movement. So there's always something waiting in the wings to get the people that are saying the inconvenient truth.
Yeah, I think the police were more likely to shoot, to use deadly force. Yeah, it's the same thing.
That's what I'm... Yeah. You got the phrasing right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. There's no bias for white on black. And I think it was like black officers are maybe even more likely to shoot black suspects and stuff like that. So it really just didn't and he even, I believe, did, because he didn't believe it, he did it again, like the same study again, like tested the results twice to make sure. So he's a great academic. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there are people out there. You got to try and get the voices out, and there's people like the Free Press are great for that. Barry Weiss, and that's an example. I don't know if people have noticed around them. Like, have you seen that any dissident voices in your workplace have been kind of ousted? I mean, that's what the mandates were very effective for. Anyone that wasn't compliant had to leave. And Barry Weiss is an example of that, not with the vaccine, but with like leaving the New York Times, because she realized it was, very driven by a certain agenda.
Yeah, my workplace is very driven by that agenda, and they're trying to get me out.
Yeah.
This is certainly the staff is, because I have a lot of woke staff there. But the management, I don't know. We're going to see what happens. I actually have to see the result of that review.
Right. Which review, sorry?
The investigation / performance review that I had.
Right.
Yeah.
What is it you're working? Where do you work?
I work in supportive housing of homeless people.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So you do need to read San Francisco then. Yeah,
it absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very much, it's a very woke work environment. Like I said, I had to take down a Progress Pride flag the other day. We'll see what the results of that are if they question me about that, but it should be fun anyway. I want to get out of that industry. I think Michael Schellenberger made it very, very clear that the whole philosophy that's based on is not good for people.
Yeah.
It's causing an explosion in homelessness and death and drug addiction.
Yeah, totally. And there you go. Where's that come from? Oh, that's right. The Sacklers. It's people wanting to profit off of death and destruction. The San Francisco is a great book. Michael's a wonderful example of someone, again, that changes his mind, because he used to advocate for housing first, safe supply, all of that stuff, and then realized when you do the research, actually none of it's working out. And he lives in San Francisco, which is particularly bad. But it's very much the case that you, if you take away all incentives to get clean and healthy, then why would people do it? I used to be like, okay, I see what people are saying, like they can only get clean when they've got housing, but it's not become that. It's become enabling, isn't it? And then if you don't have a reason to try and better yourself, you could just stay here and take, just forget about life. I also, from the British perspective, we don't really get taught about the impacts of colonialism in schooling in England, really. But you know, I when I left school did read about the Opium Wars and things like that, and I'm like, this is just classic. Like, this has been done before. It's a good way to destroy a society. So yeah, I almost think it's by design as well, you know. But people, there's been this very interesting shift. Is the homeless one's actually the only one where leftists care about freedom. Like, they should have the freedom to take the drugs that they want. Right? So they should
as long as it's destructive, they're okay with it.
Yeah, and and then that's been framed as somehow compassionate. It's compassionate to let people die.
It's also justice because they've been mistreated by society. So you better not tell them what to do.
Yes,
they have their rights. You know.
That's right. The victim is the above all else. But like, they've made it compassionate to let people die on the street, as opposed to compassionate to get them treatment, which sometimes might need to be a little coercive, like carrot and stick method. But if that's what works, it's, you know, you've got to look at results at the end of the day. And the results are that deaths are going up with these progressive ideas. And the interesting thing about, obviously, this crisis with fentanyl and everything is that it's classless, you know, in terms of fentanyl poisoning. It doesn't care if you're rich or poor, then you don't even have to be homeless to be impacted by that, right? So I think hopefully that's a way to get people to pay attention, because it's not just going to impact people on the street. It's going to start impacting people's children that have money and have maybe been thinking that this was the right approach, and then if their kid gets, you know, inadvertently poisoned when they're trying to just party like people used to do back in the day when this stuff wasn't around, you know, they hopefully will come around to a different viewpoint on it. But you really wish it didn't have to get to that level of tragedy before people would start thinking, is this the right direction, right? Vending machines, schools giving out safe snorting kits, you know, that's happening here.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming, Bryony.
Yeah, it's been great. We'd not met before, so it's been nice to sit and get to know you a bit better. Someone nearby, like, you know, you got to find each other. That's been the lesson from COVID for me, because you think, oh, you know, just because I'm a mum and I'm going to meet mum friends there, or I like art, so I'm going to meet the arts and culture crowd. Like, I don't think until something like COVID came up where you realise, just the fundamental principles, who shares those values with me, because there's a lot of superficial stuff going on where you'll say one thing and do another. So it's been really great to meet people within this kind of freedom community, and the people that care about, you know, pluralistic societies, real diversity, real inclusion of different viewpoints, not a grievance. Someone wrote this beautiful line, and I use it all the time: grievance-based monoculture, right? Like, none of that. Let's have a laugh together. Let's, you know, and I think that's that whole adage of, you know, hard times making strong people, and good times making weak people. Because that's why all the people I meet that have been through tough times are the funniest, and they have the best sense of humor, and they're just the best people to be around. So we need to, I think that would be something that comes out of this. We're going to start lightening up, and start
eventually
having better relationships, yeah, hopefully. If we're not all in the metaverse by then.
Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot.
Great, thanks.